so we'll get started up here. And the goal today is really high-level overview in terms of kind of where analytics are today, where organizations are adopting them, kind of what looks best in class. But more importantly, in the back end, really talking about how to drive performance. We'll talk a little bit about where things are today and really where things are going in the future. So first component here is just really to kind of walk you through what are the characteristics of a data-driven organization, and you can kind of do a mental checklist in terms of where is my organization today relative to some of these key characteristics. I would say most organizations have some components of them. So this is always a fun one, right? Data is embedded in every decision, interaction, and process. Where would you guys say you are in that? Multiple EMRs, yeah. And a lot of times, right, decisions get made. It's kind of, there's this collective experience in this room. I'm sure we put a problem down on the table, even without all the data or facts, you guys could probably intuit the likelihood of what a positive outcome would be. But that's sometimes a lot of bias and facts in that as opposed to kind of empirical facts, right? Data is processed and delivered in real time. I can tell you from my experience, I could never get that. So generally I was living in a 30-day lag with a large platform, right? When I had something small or a couple sites that I was running, I could get that in real time. But that's kind of a challenge. But again, we're looking at aspirational components here. Other characteristic, flexible storage, right? Enables integration. So how do you get access to the data? I think you kind of hit on that in terms of disparate systems, right? Talking to each other. That was discussed somewhat on the previous presentation as well. The data is actually used and it's treated as a product in terms of it's actually valued in decisions and tools are built around it. Previous speaker talked about the importance of a CIO, right? For this presentation, it's called Chief Data Officer. CIO kind of oftentimes takes on that role. Data ecosystem membership is the norm. So what does that mean? That means organizations that have databases that you can tap into, like advisory board, definitive, if you use those before, in terms of assessing your market, or any data that's getting sent in that say, and they're available in terms of maybe you want to understand cancer statistics in your particular market, because you want to see, how that growth trend measured up with what your growth, let's say in PET CT is, or your overall cancer care imaging, how's that growing relative to the new coincidences in the market. So that's what that means. And then the data is prioritized and automated in terms of privacy, and that the data is clean and real and accurate. So within healthcare, we're just going to touch base on how it's used. And I think a lot of this is stuff you guys are already doing in some cases. In some cases, there's a lot of talk about it, but not really there, right? So diagnosis and treatment, analyze MRI and CT scans, and development of treatment plans based on that. So certainly treatment plans are getting based on kind of what your teams do every day. In terms of the AI around how images are getting analyzed, we're really moving into the cusp of this. I had lunch early this week with the person who developed Deep Health, which is a mammography-based AI. So kind of auto reading to support the radiologist on that. And I asked him what his challenges were, and the issue is more around kind of the economic value of that and how does that come alongside the radiologist in terms of how they do that. So in some cases, the technology exists to kind of make things better. The challenge is, historically how it's been done and how does it get incorporated in a way that makes sense. When you look at the data, it certainly makes sense from a clinical standpoint for a patient, but the challenges in terms of historically what's been done, how does the cost of that get integrated in, and kind of the challenges in moving forward with that. And we could name probably 20 things here as a collective team in terms of things that are available. More recent, right, some of the AI on some of the systems in terms of cutting your acquisitions down in half and then being able to interpolate them up and essentially do your scans in half the time. So there's a company out there, subtle right now, but GE and Canon and Siemens and Philips all have some products that are leaning into that. So that'll change the way things work, as we go forward in those workflows. Population management, right? Obviously, analytics have been applied to that. Again, I would say we're in early stages. We talked a little about ACOs and how do we take risk on data, but insurance companies have been using this information for a long time, wrapping intelligence around that. Obviously, drug discovery and development. That's something that's been used for a long time. Predictive analytics is really something that is new in the healthcare space, not new in some other spaces, but as computing power has increased and techniques in terms of parsing raw data and information have improved, this will become more relevant with what we do every day. So here's a way to think about this. Just when you think about equipment uptime and service, I'll just ask you this question because I'm flying out tonight. Would you get on a plane if it was serviced on a break-fix model? Would you?
Waiting for it to break?
Yeah. No. Okay. So you're in the OR and your C-arm goes down, or your PET-C, you've got 10 cancer patients that need to be staged and your PET-CT is down. And we as an industry actually accept that as the norm. And the anxiety, you get patient anxiety, you've got delays in care, you've got revenue issues that then roll into that. Major top of the pyramid is the patient care component, but that's the world that we live in, right? I mean, and that model hasn't changed in 50 years. Think about that. So if you can imagine a world, let's say 3, 4, 5 years from now in which it's predictive and you eliminate that component and that stress in terms of how that is delivered over time. That's a game changer in terms of how you then start delivering services. And so there's a lot of work being done around that through log data and information. So think about that, because in healthcare, the model's been a break fix for as long as, well, I'm an old man, but as long as I've been in it, and probably prior to that. And then from a standpoint of just kind of if you look at scheduling, patient scheduling themselves, pre-authorization, balance billing. Do any of you guys deal with billing? Yes? Yeah. How does your balance billing work?
Do you have a balance if people get it?
Yeah, well, it's so, when a patient is showing up, sometimes they're collecting a standard balance bill. The chances of that typically being accurate in most cases are kind of a 50-50 deal, sometimes 60, 70% you're right. So if you're collecting $100 for a payment, generally there's a check going back to the patient at some point. And because the systems, the way they work, there's delays in terms of what care they already had and what's logged into the system and who's open. So all of that. Right now, the systems are still lagging behind kind of how these plans are designed. So that actually, it may be outside of some of your team's purview, but the reality of the cost of all of that, collecting and resending checks back, it adds a huge burden, administrative burden to the system. It costs the system a lot of money. So there's a bunch of work being done on moving that forward. when you think about kind of what you guys do every day, I'm assuming most meetings you go into, it's discussions about how we move forward in terms of doing more or getting more in the door, getting more referrals in. So when you think about data, I'll just tell you that, in most of my history in healthcare, I didn't really think about data in terms of, using data to then, let's say, make operational decisions, other than if it was financial, because those were easy to get and those were tangible. But in terms of being able to pull data in terms of my referral basis, some of the key statistics, my turnaround time in terms of volumes, you know, tech scans per hour, and kind of all of these kind of things. Generally, in my early career, I wasn't thinking about those things, and on the back end of my career, I started thinking about them a lot as more data was available. The issue was getting clean, actionable data that you felt you could make the right decision on. So what you measure, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is what you decide to measure and how you cascade that through your organization is super critical, because, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but it's really about your organization strategy and your culture and how's that aligned. And that means that one hospital system or one platform may be doing something a little bit different than another, and there can be some very good reasons for that. So determining what measures are the most important. Apparently with this group, the most important piece is access to capital. And I'm wrestling the other departments for it. Once those are decided, right, what are those key KPIs, right? Key performance indicators. Others have different acronyms for those. So once you decide on what you're going to measure, what is then that right measure? What is that right KPI and why? If you have a good KPI or a set of them and they're sitting in somebody's computer somewhere and the team's under you, don't see them, what's the value of that, right? So having those available and thinking about kind of cascade and leadership cascade through an organization, we'll talk a little bit about that. But KPIs should be put in place to elevate the overall organization. So what you do needs to tie up with the strategy of your organization, and we'll talk a little bit later about both. And I'll just say this, and again, KPIs are, and performance metrics are really about leadership and change management. That's how you should orientate toward that in terms of how you think of them. They're not a proxy for leadership. They're a tool to understand where you are relative to critical goals and performance that are important to you, the organization, and the patient you serve. And that should tie out with your organization. So establishing KPIs in your organization, my starting point, and I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but my starting point is always asking some critical questions in terms of what is the goal of our organization? What is the strategy of our organization? With the part that I'm in charge of and controlling, what do I need to do to then support that goal? And that can be, there are throughput goals, there are financial goals, there are patient care goals and quality of care goals, right? But taking time to actually have that discussion, at least in my experience, is the starting point, and a lot of organizations kind of miss that along the way. So you walk into a meeting and it's, how was your patient satisfaction score? Oh, it was this. Well, who in the organization knows that? Who's measured on that? And how does that relate to what the overall goal of the organization is? And does everybody have that same goal? And how does that cascade down? But it's got to tie out with what an organization is trying to achieve. So, right, determining what you're going to monitor, define the KPI criteria. criteria and owner, really pretty basic. So what does success look like? And I would say sometimes success is iterative, right? We all want nirvana. Usually we're somewhere south of nirvana. And to try to get from here to there, it's not a light switch, right? So when you think about building KPIs, there's got to be reasonableness put in there in terms of that iteration. And think of iterating in terms of kind of continuous improvement, right? You're pulling and leading the team along toward a goal. Think of it in that way. Tough spot, identify the data sources, right? You may have an idea in terms of, I would really like to be able to measure this. The data's sitting over here in some box that I can't get my hands on. And oh, by the way, the folks who control that, I don't have a direct line, and it's important to me and it's not important to them. So how do we bridge those? Those are kind of real challenges, kind of on a regular basis. That's why if you think about going back in terms of moving an organization forward, if it ties out to an overall strategy as opposed to a personal goal, you always have a better chance of then how do you navigate that fully for an organization. So if you kind of think about it in those terms. Then what are the timelines in terms of how do you measure that? Is that something you want to see daily? Is it monthly? You trend that. And what's not embedded in here is rewards, right? How do you create excitement and alignment in terms of recognition of moving toward those KPIs? And that can take the form of all sorts of different kinds. It doesn't necessarily mean it's monetary, but it can certainly mean recognition as an organization, recognition of individuals who are moving forward. And KPIs really can be used to drive organizational changes. And I can tell you, I'll just share with you a quick boring story, because that's what you guys want. So one of my biggest challenges when I became the president of Alliance, I had 45 states and revenue in every single state and staffs in every single state. And so I had stuff in Alaska, stuff on the Canadian border, stuff in Missouri. All those states have, trust me, Alaska has its own culture, and we're not part of it. But all different cultures. And the only place I wanted to start was patient satisfaction, to create a standard across the organization so that the team knew that, hey, if I'm in Massachusetts, I have the same patient satisfaction goal as the person in Missouri. And that there was visibility to that for a couple of reasons, because as my background is as a tech, nuclear and MR tech, and I always wanted to know what the patients thought of the service I was giving to them. And also, back when I was doing it in the old days, you never really got that unless a patient said something to you. Oh, thank you. Or, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, whatever the circumstance was. But so the challenge became, how do you cascade that with information that is going to be relevant to the people who are serving those patients across those 45 states? And we looked at a couple of the different companies and all of this stuff, and you get this PDF report, and then what do you do with it, and how do you get that to the team? And so, because it was important to our organization from a healthcare perspective, that the number one thing we wanted to be focused on was what did patients feel about the service we were providing? So then we could provide that to our customers, and then the staff would understand too what the patients feel about the service that they're providing. We literally went through, it took us a year, we got a group of techs together, a group of managers together, and we built out a system that we would get the surveys, and we had them an independent source do the surveys, we would get the data, we would download it, and then we would manually create reports digitally for all of the managers, every single asset, every single site, and then we would send that to them. And the reason I bring this up is the reason we did that was to create a standard that we could measure across the organization. The other reason is that we would then put awards around that. So there were quarterly awards for best performance recognition, buttons, different things. We had multiple different awards that we applied to that. And the impact for the staff was, the staff didn't like it. You're going to do what? And you're going to tell me how much? It was something new, and it was, oh my gosh, now you're telling me our goal as an organization is this level, and now we're going to know. And the other, share with this, what we also had the team do was we put a sign for each of the units, and it would say, our goal as an organization is this, and our team is performing at this, and so that there was visibility to it as well, and there's some source of pride around that. And the reason I bring this up is that it takes effort to move these things forward, and if it's important for you and your organization, putting the effort in, it pays off over time, because over time, then that became a real hallmark for us in terms of how we rewarded people, how we engaged our folks, and we set a standard in terms of that care across the board. Today, if you want to enter into something like that, what's interesting is some of those challenges still exist. So engaging your organization in kind of these key things, whether it's a throughput piece or a patient care piece or an incident component piece, is the ability to pull those things together. But you've got to get momentum in there, and there's tools in the market today to do that. So here are some typical cascades, and I will tell you these are the ones that I used to drive my business off of before joining Glassbeam. And these were all done through essentially a group of analysts that would tap into the data, and then we would drive these every day and then every month. And the idea of this is, and I'm just going to put out there this concept of pull through in an organization. And so how many times do we ask our staffs to do something? It may be an administrative piece, it may be whatever the, let's say, ongoing task might be that might be important at some level of the organization, but doesn't go up, let's say, to the boardroom. Does that happen? Yes, Rich, that happens. Okay, good. Who said that? Oh, that was me. Okay. Your staff knows if something goes up through the organization and if it's important. So the concept of cascading goals is critically important. So if information is just going to you and it does help you drive your performance of your team, that's great. What's more powerful is that if it goes from you and then it's going up to the leadership in terms of that's tangible for the total organization. And that's, we're talking about nirvana here, and I know that, that it takes a bit to do that, but you should, if you decide to go on this journey, you should think about these things in terms of, if I'm the VP of clinical services, out of these KPIs, how do those goals then cascade down to the director? How do they cascade down to a manager? How do they cascade down to a staff person who's engaging a patient? And there should be a theme in terms of the pieces of that they can control, and they should also understand how that feeds up to leadership, and they should also understand how that then feeds into the overall organizational strategy in terms of what good looks like. So the goal of KPIs is a couple of things, right? It's to create standards, and it's to create a mechanism in which you're truly operating your business with. A lot of organizations will have KPIs, they get pulled out at a quarterly meeting and people have an oh crap moment where they say, oh, I got to get a trend going. I got a week to do it because I got to get into this quarterly meeting and we're been measuring whatever it was they were measuring. And it may be a specific measure oftentimes that is a program related improvement that's being done for a period of time that may or may not be sustainable. So the idea of KPIs and continuous improvement is that these are developed to truly run your business in a way in which I call it squaring the corners. If you're doing a one-time program on a key issue, if you don't have something in place to continue to measure and keep that corner sharp, it will get rounded. So cultures do what cultures do. Certain orientations, right, in terms of, that's I think about magnet technology, right? You, if you're doing MRI imaging, the magnet is what the magnet is. When you're doing your imaging, you're altering that through force of the gradients, and that's changing what's happening. So think about the gradients as almost like it's like a KPI. Here's what I'm trying to do because I want to deliver this slice in Rich's abdomen. The minute you take that away, magnet goes back to what it was doing. So when you think about a programmatic approach and continuous improvement, keeping these in place and truly managing to it. So, and how do you do that? You know, just sending somebody a document and not even, you know, here's your KPIs, okay, great. How you run your meetings, what questions you ask, and how you reward. It's truly change management in terms of how you adopt and then lead that change in terms of moving forward as an organization. Does that make sense? Come on, hospitals will operate just like independent facilities. Yeah. And in a hospital, right, you've got all sorts of constituencies you're dealing with, right? OR, ER, the floors, when rounds happen, when orders come in, you know, how many transporters there are in a given day, right, in terms of challenge. But imagine coming up with a KPI in terms of that's building those standards and then building framework around, hey, we want these facilities to all run at that commercial level, and here's what the expectation is. And then just because you put a number in place, that's only really the beginning of the work, right? But if you get an institution behind how to move forward with those things, and it could be all sorts of, you know, difference between hospital and outpatient imaging, but you know, you can have hospitals that are doing more volume and better flow than outpatient centers too. I've definitely seen that in the past. Certainly a challenge. This is kind of a big one, right? Especially as mergers continue. Ability to kind of standardize across technologies and standardize in terms of what's important, especially with the grouping of institutions. Forget about, you know, the pressure of, you know, varying requirements of radiologists, right? In terms of this is the knee study for Dr. Smith and this is a knee study for Dr. Jones, right? So that's definitely a challenge. Yeah, so how many folks are happy with their centralized scheduling departments today? Yeah. Do they have KPIs? Yeah. I'll tell you, I had 2 centralized scheduling departments, one in Canton and one in Andover, Mass. And we ended up applying KPIs to them in terms of, and it was visible live, they could see it. It was referral answer time. So they had a goal of under 10 seconds. We had to hit that 93% of the time. We'd reward them on that. And then it was referral schedule. And then we would track that in terms of then completion rate at the particular location. Right? So you can think about that cascade. Because the reality is you can get really efficient on 3 scans a day, and you can get really efficient on 30 scans a day. What's happening in the front of that funnel can then determine what happens in the middle where that patient interaction is actually happening. There's always a lot of focus on that patient interaction, which is critical in terms of how efficient that is. But the change down the line, so when you think about KPI development, and it can be somewhat complex, linking into that then can actually drive a lot of things. So again, it's not a simple answer, but and it's work that needs to be put in. But if you put that work in, you'll see value come out of the other end in terms of efficiency, productivity, and cost, frankly. So today, there are systems that can pull that data together, can pull it in a vendor-neutral way that will give you those cascades and KPIs that can then help you drive those components. And I'll tell you, I'll just share this with you. When we put those KPIs in place, it took about a year. We built rewards around that. I had my biggest jump in volume in the next year, just based on visibility to that performance. And to tell you we were, at 93% out of the gate, no way. We were answering calls at 30 seconds, 40 seconds. Our abandon rate was almost 10%. It was not good. And it took time. It took time to get that efficient, but we did get to that point where 90+% we were answering within 10 seconds. Another 8% we were coming in at about call it 10 to 15 seconds, and then we were never quite, we never quite get to nirvana. I don't know that we were ever gonna, but we're striving for that, right? And our abandon rate went down under 1%. And we're doing a better job for the referring physicians. We're doing a better job for the patients. We're moving more patients through the system in a more timely fashion, right? So it was the bane of my existence, trust me. Managing old assets, right? I think we brought up a couple of times the CapEx challenge. How those assets are managed, though, in terms of useful life of them, what the OEM says versus what the asset can really do, usually two different things, at least in my experience. And so getting predictive analytics around how imaging assets are managed, and getting to a point where you're measuring the right things in terms of predicting potential downtime that's possible today with various systems. Kind of a challenge, right, is design. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely worked at hospitals in which, stuff was built in the 50s. I had stuff in the 70s, and then, stuff in the 2000s, and kind of that ergonomic design that's always a challenge. So impacts a lot of things. With all these, kind of the key top 4 ones, though, today there are predictive analytics around all of these components. And I just encourage you, if you're not doing any of this today, to explore where things are going, because the next few years, just share in outside of healthcare, typical moderate-sized business is using these tools in terms of KPIs to drive your business. So it's not just about the P&L, it's about kind of key performance in terms of all aspects of a business. And when you hear the talk before in terms of the pressures on our space, the requirements on our space, the winners in long term are going to be the ones that use these tools to be highly efficient, highly directive, and highly prescriptive about how they move forward. At the same time, right, the challenge is at the same time maintaining that highest level of patient care. And if you build the right management tools and KPIs around that, it helps greatly in terms of moving that forward. And for our industry, this is a shift, because this is a really change management shift. And you need to be thinking about that. So I know some people are probably going, all right, 5 years to retirement. He said 3 to 5 years. Maybe I can. It's coming. It's coming. And it's just a matter of time in terms of when that gets adopted into your organization. So you need to be thinking about these things, because right now the independent providers have a level of this that they're applying now. So I think, as you had brought up, kind of some of the independent facilities, how they operate. The big providers, they're getting more and more metric driven. The challenge is in terms of the cost, in terms of how they're pulling that together, because a lot of it is still in disparate systems and using analysts to do this. Where things are going is things are going to get connected in, all of your PACS, your DICOM data, your report turnaround time, all of those things, because right now we measure some things, right? We measure report turnaround time. Some institutions order from the ER to completion of the CT. We do those things, right? Stroke protocol, how are we doing on those things? Are we looking at that in one scorecard in terms of all of those key factors? If there's 5 of them for an institution or 6, that's the direction that things are definitely going. So key analytics for imaging today, right, is the ability to create and develop proactive and predictive alerts. That exists today in terms of with some of the OEMs, and also there are third-party providers that can then drive that in terms of knowledge of when your tube is actually going to go or when your cable is about to fail, so that actually exists today. From a utilization standpoint, and when I say utilization, I mean in a global sense, because I consider scheduling the front end of utilization. So when we think about utilization, it's really about all the key factors along that chain, and I would actually include that patient interaction, completion rates. Why don't a patient get completed? How many rescans happen? How many times a patient? All of that kind of key things that then drive that. So it's not, when you think of utilization, don't necessarily think about it as I had 10 scans today, we completed 8, so my utilization is 80%. That's, you got to think of it in a much broader sense of that, because there's various factors on that. Not that that metric is not important. It's very important, because if you're only getting 8 out of the 10 done, why is that? Is it a no-show? Is it claustrophobic? Is it claustrophobic patients and it's always on a certain shift? But do you have access to that information? Can you cascade into it and then take action? So utilization, and then service life cycle in terms of, again, thinking about that break fix, where we are today, break fix, and orientating into a more predictive world, especially when it comes to asset. So key takeaways, right? Defining key goals for your organization, being able to build KPIs around that. And I would say this, I'm talking in a very global way. You can start this on your own in terms of with your own teams, right? But nirvana is that you're doing this organization. But there typically isn't much stopping you to start taking steps with some of these components now in terms of how you lead and manage your team. And maybe sometimes that's where you need to start to pull the rest of the organization along with you. Because one thing I've learned in my career is that you should never underestimate the power that a person can bring to the table and their ability to move an organization forward. It's not always the CEO. It's not always the president. Sometimes it's a groundswell of people who see what needs to get done and are willing to spend some time to build something, to start moving something forward. So, again, cascade through your organization, critical. You got to have buy-in, you got to have training, and people have to be clear in terms of they believe in the key KPIs and the roadway to get there. Going to continue from a digital transformation, especially over the next 3 to 5 years, for sure, because the pressures are going to force that. The pressures problems and how do you then address those in a material way? And as I said, KPIs, they're a way to keep your corners sharp, right? In terms of continuous improvement. And the KPIs that you have today should be something different a couple of years from now. It should be moving up and to the right in terms of performance. Or the culture has gotten to a point where maybe you don't measure that, but you're measuring something else because you've gotten to another level.